Welcome to Seductive Chronicles. In today's video, we're diving into a story about unexpected connections, quiet rediscovery, and the tender moments that remind us life is never truly done surprising us. My cousin Linda had always insisted that her house was alive in its own peculiar way. Not haunted, nothing sinister ever clung to its walls, but imbued with a sort of comfortable, slightly messy spirit that made it feel deeply human. It was the kind of place where you could shuffle inside after a long day, kick off your shoes without a second thought, and sink into a sagging armchair that had absorbed decades of laughter, tears, and casual conversations over mugs of steaming coffee. It was exactly what I needed. At 52, my life had settled into a kind of uneasy quiet. The divorce hadn't been a battlefield. In fact, it had been strangely civil, as though my ex-husband and I both recognized that whatever spark had once existed had long since sputtered out. But even an amicable split leaves behind a hollow that echoes if you stand still too long. And when the kids moved out one after the other in what felt like the blink of an eye, the house transformed from the backdrop of my busy, purpose-driven years into a shrine to the past. So when Linda called one Thursday afternoon to ask if I might be willing to stay at her place while she and Tom whisked themselves away on an anniversary trip, I didn't hesitate. I was halfway to my suitcase before she'd even finished explaining. Linda's street was nothing like my sterile suburban neighborhood, where identical houses lined up in neat rows, each one painted a carefully approved shade of beige. Her home sat on a quiet, tree-lined block where old oaks spread their branches across cracked sidewalks, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine mingling with freshly mown grass. Just pulling up to the curb, I felt something unclench in my chest. Inside, the familiar clutter of Linda's life greeted me, walls brimming with framed photographs chronicling her boys' journey from gap-toothed toddlers to tall young men in graduation caps, books stacked in teetering piles, and little ceramic animals she'd collected over the years. Each room radiated a warmth that seemed to whisper, "You belong here, even if only for a little while." That first evening, I allowed myself to simply be. No list to complete, no dinners to prepare, no carefully curated social plans to feign purpose. I wandered her garden, where bursts of color erupted from every patch of soil, cheerful zinnias, fragrant lavender, and tangled vines that refused to be tamed. Later, I curled up on the porch swing with a glass of iced tea, watching as the sky melted into a canvas of dusky purples and burnished oranges. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I felt a flicker of contentment. Linda, ever thoughtful, had left me a neatly labeled container of lasagna in the fridge. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter, relishing the quiet freedom of not having to set a place at the table. When the last bite was gone, I drifted into the living room, wrapping myself in an old Afghan and leafing through photo albums that held the snapshots of our shared childhoods. The house was hushed save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards, sounds that felt less like loneliness and more like a lullaby. By the time I climbed into the guest room bed, exhaustion tugged at me in a sweet, heavy way. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender, and the garden beyond the window was a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. My last thought before sleep claimed me was simple gratitude for Linda, for her generous heart, for this small interlude of peace. Sometime after midnight, I awoke with a start. It wasn't a noise exactly, more a subtle shift, a feeling that the house had roused itself alongside me. My heart gave a quick, startled beat. Then came a soft, unmistakable thud from downstairs, followed by the slow click of a door closing. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Had Linda and Tom come home early? But the footsteps that followed didn't match the brisk cadence of someone returning to their own space. These steps were careful, almost tentative. I sat up, my breath caught halfway between fear and confusion. The hallway light spilled a dim glow under the door, illuminating the faint outline of a shadow. A moment later, the doorknob began to turn, moving with a hesitant deliberation that made my stomach tighten. I thought of everything at once: intruders, neighbors, some unthinkable accident. And in that swirl of panic, I nearly called out. But then the door eased open, and a tall figure stepped across the threshold. He paused, gaze fixed on the floor, as if he were trying to be invisible. For a moment, I simply stared at him, piecing together what I knew. The dark curls, the familiar line of his jaw, so much like his father's. Leo? Linda's youngest, her baby, though he hadn't been a baby in years. He'd grown taller since the last time I'd seen him, lean and broad-shouldered, with the restless energy of a young man who hadn't yet decided what shape his life would take. Recognition flashed across his face, followed swiftly by an endearing flush of embarrassment. "Aunt Sarah?" His voice was deeper than I remembered, a low rumble that felt almost out of place in the quiet room. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my pulse fluttering there. "Leo," I exhaled, trying to sound lighthearted even as my heart still pounded. "You scared me half to death." He shifted, adjusting the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know anyone was here. I thought Mom and Dad were out." "They are," I explained, tugging the quilt a little higher around my shoulders. "I'm just house-sitting while they're away." He nodded, still standing in the doorway, caught somewhere between apology and amusement. In the dim light, he looked both impossibly young and unmistakably grown. A boy and a man in the same breath. "Well," he said finally, a sheepish grin tugging at his mouth, "this is awkward." I couldn't help it. A laugh burst free, a bright, startled sound that softened the tension between us. "Just a little," I admitted. He looked around as though suddenly realizing he was still looming over me in the doorway. "I was just going to crash here for the night," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the room. "I've got an early class on Monday. Didn't want to drive all the way back tomorrow." "Of course," I said quickly, already swinging my legs out of bed. "It's your room. I can take the sofa." "No, no way," he protested, stepping inside before I could protest further. "I'll take the couch. I've slept there a million times." We stood there, locked in a polite standoff, the air charged with something I couldn't quite name. And beneath the awkwardness, I felt a strange, unexpected warmth, a flicker of connection that went beyond family ties. It was there in the way his eyes met mine, unguarded and searching, in the quiet realization that neither of us felt quite ready to step back into our separate solitude. Finally, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Tell you what," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "The bed's big enough for two, as long as you don't snore." For a heartbeat, he looked stunned. Then a boyish grin lit up his face, transforming him back into the kid I remembered, gangly and eager and full of promise. "Deal," he said, voice warm with relief. "But no guarantees about the snoring." He set his bag down by the door, moving with the easy grace of someone who belonged. As he slipped onto the far side of the bed, the mattress dipped under his weight, and I was acutely aware of the narrow space separating us. The scent of him, clean soap and the faint musk of late-night travel, rose between us, unbalancing me in a way I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just a boy, my cousin's son. But in the soft glow of the hallway light, the truth felt far more complicated. We lay side by side, staring up at the ceiling as the house settled around us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I listened to the slow cadence of his breathing, felt the heat radiating from his body, and wondered at the quiet comfort of sharing a space with another human being. Eventually, his voice broke the silence, low and thoughtful. "How have you been?" "Really?" The question landed with a weight that surprised me. Not the casual, perfunctory "how are you?" I've learned to answer automatically, but something more earnest. a genuine curiosity that softened something deep inside me. I turned my head on the pillow to find him watching me, his expression open and unguarded. I've been okay, I admitted, and the word felt inadequate, like trying to describe an ocean with a single drop of water. It's been quiet. He nodded slowly. Mom told me about the divorce. I'm sorry. It was for the best, I said, and for the first time, I realized I meant it. We just grew apart. It happens. It does, he agreed softly, his eyes thoughtful. I see it with my friends' parents sometimes. It's like they're living in the same house, but on different planets. Something in his insightfulness took me by surprise. He was so young, yet there was an old soul behind those eyes, a knowing I hadn't expected. We spoke for hours in the hush of that small room, our voices weaving a tapestry of shared stories and hidden truths. He told me about his classes, about his fascination with photography, how capturing a fleeting moment could feel like holding on to something real in a world that kept slipping past. I found myself telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone, about the empty evenings when the house seemed to echo with the ghosts of the life I'd built, about the dreams I quietly packed away in favor of stability and duty. He listened without judgment, his quiet presence like a balm to an ache I hadn't fully acknowledged. When his hand finally found mine in the darkness, a simple, unadorned gesture, I felt a warmth that spread through me like sunlight. It wasn't romantic. It was deeper than that. A silent promise that I wasn't as alone as I'd come to believe. And there, in that unexpected moment of connection, I felt something shift. I realized that sometimes the most profound chapters of our lives don't announce themselves with fireworks or drama. They unfold quietly, in the small hours of the night, when your defenses are down and your heart is just tender enough to notice. The first blush of dawn began to creep through the curtains, painting the walls in pale gold. Our conversation had slowed to a comfortable hush, both of us drifting in that liminal space between wakefulness and dreams. His thumb traced absent patterns on the back of my hand, and I closed my eyes, simply breathing, savoring the simple, human comfort of being seen. You know, he murmured, voice thick with sleep, you're not just my Aunt Sarah. You're a really cool person. A quiet laugh escaped me, warm and a little unsteady. You're not so bad yourself, Leo. He gave my hand a final, gentle squeeze before turning onto his side. I watched the slow rise and fall of his shoulders as he surrendered to sleep, his presence a reassuring weight in the room. Long after his breathing had evened out, I lay awake, feeling something inside me reawaken. It wasn't anything dramatic or life-changing, just a subtle but powerful reminder that connection, real, honest connection, was still possible. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it. Eventually, exhaustion tugged me under, and I drifted off to sleep with a smile curving my lips. When I woke, the bed beside me was empty, the sheets cool where his warmth had been. For a disorienting moment, I wondered if I dreamed the entire night, the conversation, the vulnerable honesty, the unexpected companionship. But then I spotted the duffel bag by the door and the small folded note resting neatly on the bedside table. My heart did a little flutter as I reached for it. Aunt Sarah, it read in that unmistakably youthful scrawl. Went for a run. Coffee's on the pot. Help yourself. It was really nice talking to you last night. Leo? I held the note for a moment, letting the quiet sweetness of it sink in. It had been real, every second. Pushing back the quill, I swung my feet to the floor and padded downstairs. The house was bathed in soft morning light, illuminating the small messes and homely touches that made it feel alive, proof that life continued, even in the smallest details. The smell of freshly brewed coffee greeted me as I stepped into the kitchen. Not the generic instant stuff I'd grown accustomed to at home, but the rich, almost decadent aroma of freshly ground beans. He'd thought to make a pot for me. I poured a mug and took the first slow sip, savoring the warmth as it spread through me. For a moment, I simply stood there, watching the garden beyond the kitchen window, vines climbing the fence, flowers reaching for the sun. The world looked different this morning. Brighter, less lonely. The front door swung open, followed by the sound of footsteps. Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway, cheeks flushed from his run, hair damp with sweat. He looked more vibrant than I'd ever seen him, as if the energy buzzing in his veins was too big for his body to contain. "Morning," he said, catching his breath, a lopsided grin spreading across his face. "Good morning," I replied, smiling into my mug. "Thanks for the coffee. It's perfect." "No problem," he said, grabbing a glass and filling it at the tap. He drained it in one long gulp, then leaned against the counter opposite me. For a while, we didn't speak. We didn't have to. The comfortable silence was full of all the things we'd shared the night before. Finally, he set the glass down and crossed his arms. "So, what are you going to do today?" I laughed softly. "Probably read. Maybe take a walk. I hadn't really planned much." "Sounds peaceful," he said, "but maybe a little boring." I lifted an eyebrow at him. "And what would you suggest, a wise one?" He grinned, that mischievous glint in his eyes making him look younger. "I was thinking of going for a drive up the coast. There's this diner in a little town about an hour from here. Best milkshakes you'll ever taste." He hesitated then, as though considering whether he should say more. His gaze met mine, warm and open. "You should come." For a moment, the responsible, predictable part of me nearly declined. It was too impulsive, too spontaneous, so far from the safe routine I'd built around myself. But then I thought about the night before, about how good it had felt to be known, to be seen without all the protective layers. And I realized I didn't want to go back to the same safe habits. Not yet. "All right," I said, feeling something in me flutter to life. "But you're buying the milkshakes." "Deal," he said, his grin stretching wide as the morning light. The drive up the coast felt like something out of a dream. We rolled down the windows and let the salt-laden breeze whip through the car. Classic rock poured from the speakers, songs I hadn't heard in years, and he surprised me by knowing all the words, singing along with a bright, off-key enthusiasm that made me laugh so hard my sides hurt. The small town he'd promised was every bit as charming as he'd described. Narrow streets lined with colorful shop fronts, little bookstores tucked between cafes and antique shops. At the diner, the milkshakes arrived tall and frosted, crowned with mountains of whipped cream. "You were right," I admitted after the first taste, unable to hide my smile. "Best milkshake of my life." "Told you," he teased, tipping his glass toward mine. To spontaneous adventures. We clinked glasses like conspirators. After lunch, we wandered down to the beach. He carried his camera, snapping photos of everything, the pattern of foam on the sand, the curve of a seagull's wing, the way the sun caught the lines at the corners of my eyes. And somehow, seeing myself through his lens, I didn't mind the evidence of my age. In fact, I felt beautiful. Not in spite of the years I'd lived, but because of them. We walked until the afternoon light turned golden, our shadows stretching long behind us. He told me about the places he dreamed of seeing, Japan, Iceland, the Serengeti, and I found myself sharing stories I'd all but forgotten, the time I wanted to learn French, the brief summer when I believed I'd read a novel. Listening to him, I felt the spark of all those dormant ambitions flicker back to life. The sun was beginning its slow descent by the time we turned back toward the car. In the passenger seat, I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the road lull me into a quiet reverie. The warmth of the day, the simple intimacy of sharing it with someone who asked nothing of me but honesty. It felt like a kind of healing I hadn't known I needed. When we pulled into Linda's driveway, the sky was ablaze with color, fiery reds and golds melting into indigo. We climbed out and stood together on the porch, neither of us quite ready to let the day end. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice soft. "For today. For everything. His expression shifted, something tender and serious behind his smile. "Thank you," he said. I really needed this." In that moment, I understood. We'd both been drifting, a little unmoored in our own ways. And in finding each other, unexpectedly in a quiet house on a quiet weekend, we'd found a piece of ourselves we hadn't realized was missing. Later, as I settled into bed alone, the memory of the day wrapped around me like the softest quilt. The weekend was almost over, but the connection we'd forged felt like something that would endure, a bond not just of family, but of shared understanding, of seeing and being seen. And as the last of the sun's glow faded from the sky, I realized something quietly profound. My story wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it had only just begun. Thank you for joining me today on Seductive Chronicles. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a longing, or simply the reminder that life's most unexpected connections can bring us back to ourselves, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment like this, when an ordinary day turned into something unforgettable? Sparkles. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another tale of quiet transformation and hidden longing. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over. Sometimes it's only just beginning. Stay curious, stay open, and as always, thank you for watching Seductive Chronicles.